It is not by chance you arrived here today. You have been looking for something larger than yourself. Inside of you, there is a yearning, a calling, a hope for more, a desire for a place of belonging and caring. Through your struggles, someone, or many someones, nurtured you into being, instilling a belief in a shared purpose, a common yet precious resource that belongs to all of us when we share. And so you began seeking a beloved community, a people that does not put fences around love, a community that holds its arms open to the possibilities of love, a heart home to nourish your soul and share your gifts. Welcome home, and welcome to worship. Morning, everyone. The last time I was up here in front of you was January 19th, the day before the last presidential election. I think it's safe to say a little bit has changed in the world over these past 3 weeks, yes? When I wrote the blurb for this sermon last month, I was planning to deliver a more upbeat, positive message about the joys and responsibilities of choosing to be a member of the Unitarian Universalist congregation, with the intention of continuing the process of welcoming and onboarding our newest friends into this faith tradition and this community that they have chosen as their next spiritual home. And I'm still going to do this, but it feels like a much heavier responsibility now than it did when I first envisioned this service. At this moment in history, I am compelled to use the platform that this congregation has granted me to speak my truth as courageously as I can. Because based on what I am seeing, I believe we are at a moment of massive historic significance in this country. And because of our country's current position in this world, for the ultimate future of humankind. To our newest members, again, I offer you welcome. You are joining a faith tradition whose roots stretch back thousands of years, but whose principles have mostly emerged since the founding of this country by a small group of people that was seeking the freedom to practice their own religion and to worship the God of their beliefs free from the mandates of a king or a central church. Can you imagine how important faith must have been to a peoples that they were willing to leave the comfort and security of their homes and set sail across the vast ocean to a mysterious land with no known structures in place, where they would be alone and solely responsible for their own survival in the wilderness? Yet come they did. And one of the first things they did when they arrived was set ground rules that this faith tradition still draws from today. They made commitments to each other that said that each church was established by the peoples coming to this new land that was free to worship in the ways that they saw fit, free from the edicts of a king or a centralized church above. And from these humble roots came the ideals that inspired the next generations of peoples that came and ended up revolting entirely against their king, fueled by a radical idea that the power to make decisions that impacted a people should be made by the peoples themselves, not some all-powerful sovereign whose edicts were driven by their own whims or self-interests. These folks drafted a document which we know as the Constitution of the United States of America, a document which contains a set of ideals that the founders of this new country believed would lead to a better life, not only for themselves, but also for their children. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. The beauty of this document, and the reason it has served us so well for so long, is that the founders knew, as Frederick Douglass later said, that absolute power corrupts. He said, and this is very important, Find out just what a people will submit to, and you will have found out the exact amount of injustice and wrong which will be opposed upon them. And these will be continued till they are resisted with either words or blows or both. Find out what just a people will submit to, and you will have found out the exact amount of injustice and wrong which will be opposed upon them. How much are you willing to submit to? The people that drafted this document outlining how they intended to govern themselves knew that they were imperfect, and that all of us, for as miraculous as we are all imperfect. And that if we are to work together, we need to create structures that ensure that the decisions that are made in the best interest of all people that are governed. And the system requires significant checks and balances to ensure that no one person or class of peoples ever has the ability to grab all of the power available within the system for their own personal gain. My friends, I believe we are at a moment in history where this concept is being put to the test like never before. How did we get here? And if you're not happy with the current state of affairs, which I heard several people say during the Joys and Concerns, whose responsibility is it to try to correct it? My faith tells me that it's my responsibility. I was born in a country founded upon an ideal that said all men are created equal. I was born in a country that placed me, a citizen of this nation, at the top of the org chart. The president is not an elected king. He or she reports to me and all of you and every other citizen of this nation. We grant them this power, and we put them into a system that is supposed to be governed by a set of laws that offers guidance that says, this is what you have been elected to do. Here are the guidelines, here are the ways we expect you to conduct yourself, and here are the laws that you will be held accountable to if you deviate outside of those boundaries. And if anyone is granted that power and they abuse this power, there is only theoretically, we are the only entity theoretically strong enough to take this power back. The entity that granted that power in the first place. We the people. Now, you've heard me say this before, and I'll say it again. I've heard people in this community say that they don't want to talk about politics in church. And I'm here to tell you that this sentiment is the edict of anyone that strives to hold dominion over your life. Whoever spread that old advice of never discuss sex or religion or politics in polite company knew that the only way a peoples could ever effectively govern themselves is if they spent time doing just that, discussing, debating, and learning how to collectively decide what was right and what was wrong, not just for each individual, but for the collective. Telling folks not to do this was the easiest way to ensure that the people could be managed. And it's this is the concept that drew me to the Unitarian Universalist faith. Unitarian Universalism is nothing more than a container of ideas, just like the Constitution. Ideas that have been developed and debated and honed over the past several hundred years by our ancestors that recognized that the freedoms that they enjoy are not only rights granted by co-created laws, but more importantly, are a responsibility to maintain and ever try to make better. This faith tradition is hard work, but it is vital because its theology recognizes human fallibility and works to teach us how to adapt and survive together despite the lesser angels of our nature. Rather than just say, this is what's true, just believe this and you will be saved, this faith challenges us to constantly question, knowing that our perspectives, no matter how wise and how learned we profess to be, are by default always limited by our own time and circumstances. I can read every book ever written by every leading feminist writer in the 20th century, but I can't ever really know what it is like to be a woman. And because of this, I think it foolhardy and arrogant for me to believe myself in the best position to dictate what is the best laws for all without ensuring that the voices of women are included in that conversation. Same thing for people whose ancestors were born into slavery in this country, or whose ancestors were here before people that looked like me, whose lands were taken over by my ancestors. I will never stand up here and tell you that I know what's best for everyone, because I know the mistakes that have been made by those that came before me. And that is what drew me to this faith tradition. At the moment in history when I discovered this religion, I found an entity that recognized its limitations and invited me to continually challenge the promises that it held, knowing that its perspectives, no matter how well thought out by those that came before, always needed to be considered a work in progress. We say that revelation is not sealed, but rather it is being constantly revealed by those seekers brave enough to continually question what is most right and most wrong for all of the inhabitants on this planet we find ourselves gifted with visiting for just the briefest moment in time. Our ancestors have gifted us their best guesses as to what is most important. Our faith tradition recently updated the principles that we were handed down by those that came before and have transformed these principles into a set of values that our voluntary association of churches has democratically determined are currently our collective best guess at the ways of being in the world that will lead to the best outcomes for all. If only we can muster the strength to live into them. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. This concept became central after our recent ancestors saw the horrors of the Holocaust and realized that the path to genocide is paved with a belief that one group is inherently worth more than the other or is superior to another. Our new values updated the word worth to worthiness, because we included the voice of our black and brown siblings in the conversation, who reminded us that their ancestors' bodies were assigned a dollar value as a worth, a truth you can see in stark relief if you visit the museum in Montgomery and see the advertisements for slaves who are described using the same words as you would see in a car advertisement today, with different prices assigned to different bodies on the proposed features and benefits of each of those bodies being auctioned off. This is an example of a perspective that I could never have, but an important one that has been added because our faith tradition demands that we create space to listen to all perspectives, and that when we know better, we try to do better. The principles that drew me into this faith encouraged me to engage in a responsible search for truth and meaning, which has been expanded now to say that we covenant to learn from one another in our responsible search for truth and meaning. A vital addition that continues to remind me that my truth will always be myopic if I do not remain open to learning from the perspective of others, not just my own. My faith tells me that all of this is important because we recognize that we're each but a single strand in an interdependent web of all existence. And what happens to one happens to all. We either rise together or we will all fall together. And all of these ideals have been created in a faith tradition that relies on the same democratic process that this country was founded upon. We the people. One of the reasons I didn't have a ton of time to edit my sermon this morning is yesterday I attended a ceremony for the installation of a called minister in Urbana-Champaign UU congregation in Illinois. That UU congregation was founded in 1859, just a year before the beginnings of the Civil War. They began just before this country almost failed, and yet they've persisted. During another part of their history, I learned that they ended up bringing a lawsuit that went all the way up to the Supreme Court in a case involving the separation of church and state, which they won. And later in their history, they went on to become one of the first churches in the nation to call a woman to be their minister. My friends, this work is never done. And my visit to this other congregation reminded me that we are not alone in our efforts. This is not an easy faith tradition to be a part of. We make no false claims that you are a chosen people, or that by believing one thing or another you will magically be saved or granted all that you've ever wanted in your life. These are compelling promises, but in my mind they are empty promises. And this is a faith that is more built upon reality. And the reality is that we have emerged with self-awareness in a random universe, a universe that's guided by certain physical properties that can be understood, but we only have a small amount of influence to actually control. And that influence is determined by the choices that we make, moment to moment, individually and collectively. Just about all of the things that we take for granted in this country today exist because people just like you and me, just people just sitting in churches just like this, and in town halls and in labor unions and at school board meetings showed up and said, the way things are right now is wrong. There is a better way, and it is our responsibility to be the change we need to see in the world. Unitarian and Universalist ancestors like Judith Sargent Murray, a pioneering writer and advocate for women's rights. Women like Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who worked to convince white women to include black women in the suffrage movement. Martha and Reverend Waitstill Sharp, who left their comfortable lives as Unitarian minister couple to go to Germany to rescue Jewish children and adults, including artists, scientists from the Nazis, eventually establishing what is now the Unitarian and Universalist Service Committee, which we hold up each year in a service, and one of the world's leading voices for international justice and human rights. Julie and Hillary Goodridge were two of the 7 UUs among the plaintiffs in Goodridge versus the Department of Public Health, the case that brought marriage equality to Massachusetts in 2003 and paved the way for national marriage equality in 2015. These were all just regular people whose Unitarian or Universalist faith compelled them to stand up for the injustices that they saw in the world. Which brings us to this moment in history. I know that many of you are trying to pay close attention to the news and are scared about what looks like, for all intents and purposes, a power grab designed to completely upend our democracy. Many of you have come here this morning hoping that I would offer some guidance about what we should then do in this moment. Which brings me all the way back around to the message that I had planned to offer back when I originally thought about what I would share this morning as we welcomed our new seekers into this fold. What is our faith calling us to do in this pivotal moment in history, when all that we have thought was foundational is being turned upside down and attempted to be cast aside? My role as a faith leader is to attempt to be prophetic, to rise up to a higher perch from time to time and attempt to see what's coming, and to help to ensure that we take the steps necessary to remain safe going forward. I feel like I've been preparing for this moment for my whole life, even though I never imagined it would actually come in my lifetime. Those that founded this community that came before me, even if you didn't know for what purpose, birthed this unique container that we gather in today, knowing that there were important reasons for its existence, even if you couldn't see what those reasons might be beyond simply trying to instill a set of lessons into the next generation to ensure that they have what they need to continue to survive and thrive within whatever world they find themselves in. Nothing is inevitable. All of what came before was born of the hard work and sacrifices of our ancestors, meeting in churches just like this one. So it begs the question, what are we being called to do collectively by our faith at this tumultuous moment in history? First and foremost, beloveds, take care of yourselves. Take exquisitely good care of yourselves. So many of the protections that we have taken for granted are in the process of being erased. Attempts are being made to erase the important concepts of diversity, equity, inclusion completely from our collective vernacular. The federal government has also removed nearly all LGBTQ and HI-focused content and resources from the White House website and eliminated the content from key federal agency web pages. The president has launched a nationwide immigration enforcement operation beginning in Chicago on Sunday when ICE officers arrested nearly 1,000 people. ICE has also detained immigrants in Los Angeles, Atlanta, Colorado, Puerto Rico, and Austin, Texas. Nonprofits serving domestic violence survivors in Wisconsin have had to dramatically lower their capacity to help victims as a result of federal cuts to the Victims of Crime Act funding. Wisconsin's Head Start programs are struggling to stay open after Trump's federal freeze. And I can almost guarantee that there are a lot more people living in the inner city in lower income neighborhoods that are being impacted by that than being impacted here. But there are probably some people in this community that are being impacted by that. Wisconsin state government receives $28 billion in federal assistance. 61% is routed to the Department of Health Services, mainly for Medicaid programs for providing health care for people with lower incomes. These funds are currently being withheld. Elon Musk and his tech bros have withdrawn $900 million from the account of the Department of Education, and I'm not sure whose authority they did that on. All of these programs, and there are hundreds of more. There's this chaotic process that's happening right now to make us all go, what's happened? Which way is up? All of these programs and more were enacted by Congress based on demands made by we the people and are being eliminated through executive order with no regard for the intentions upon which they came into existence. Take care of yourselves. Make sure your health records are printed off. There is an unelected person going through all of our records right now that now has access to our Social Security numbers, our bank information, our health information. Print off your health records. Print off your financial records. Stay informed. Breathe. Don't get overwhelmed. Turn to each other. Find creative ways to take care of yourself, to keep yourself grounded as you prepare to deal with whatever upheaval is coming. I don't even care if you don't believe anything that I'm saying. This is something I should be saying as your minister anyway. The folks in Asheville, North Carolina never expected a flood would come, and their whole town got flooded away. Part of my job as a minister of keeping this community safe is to remind you, we have to do those things to take care of ourselves that aren't fun or sexy to do, but we have to do them. We have to be ready. We have to be prepared for no matter what comes. And finally, the most important thing I'm going to encourage you to do is to challenge me. This faith grants me freedom of the pulpit and grants you freedom of the pews. My perspective, I know, is heavily skewed by the relationships that I have in my life, the majority of which are made up by women, LGBTQ folks, and people with black and brown skin. It just happens to be who my circle is. They are the ones that are at greatest risk. They are the ones that are raising the warning flags most high. And they are the ones that are asking folks like me, folks that have some level of power in society because of the body that I inhabit and the privileges that have been granted for me, for help in this time. So I find myself in a moment of history that I have been preparing for, and I have been trying to prepare this community for. I've been working with your board to strengthen their covenant and prepare them to have challenging conversations where all voices are heard. We used the Braver Angels curriculum at the end of last year to help give us tools to have difficult conversations with our neighbors whose perspectives differ from ours. And Rob is going to introduce you to a right relations process which we have put in place. In case any of our conversations with our neighbors get too heated, we have a way to come back into covenant. So that's what we need to do. Challenge me. Tell me why I'm overreaching in what I'm seeing. Or help me to balance my perspective. Prepare to be challenged and be prepared to debate your perspective vigorously. Because that's what our faith calls us to do. That is what our faith has been preparing us for. And this is how our faith will help to guide us through whatever the future may hold. I will leave you today with a prayer or perhaps a blessing. Which is not something I've done very often, but this is one of those tools that our ancestors passed down to help us through troubled times. Spirit of life and love, God of many names or of no names, energy that connects us all, hear my intentions. May we each find the strength to face this moment in history. May we each safely navigate the challenges ahead. May we find support and clarity and encouragement within the safety of this beloved community. And may our efforts, guided by our chosen values, expand love within our world so powerfully that we are able to overcome the fear and anger and hatred that seem to be expanding rapidly in our midst. We ask this, hoping that the energy behind this request will settle into each of our hearts, and that we may find the strength and courage to do what needs to be done to make it so. Amen. Our closing words today can actually be found in your hymnal, and were penned by one of my seminary professors, Reverend Dr. William Schultz. Among other accomplishments, Reverend Schultz is the former head of Amnesty International. And he talked a lot about the evils that he had seen in some of the worst war-torn places in the world. And I have to say that his recommendation of my ministry to the board of Meadville Lombard Theological School is one of my most prized possessions. He wrote, "This is the mission of our faith, to teach the fragile art of hospitality, to revere both the critical mind and the generous heart, to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, and to witness to all that we must hold the world in our hands." Amen. Beloveds, thank you so much for coming here today to do this important work together. Join us. There is cake. We do have new members that we're excited to welcome into this faith. I hope I haven't scared any of them away. And just a reminder that these days that we are going through today are going to be going on for a long time. And the struggle for justice and fairness in the world is a long and never-ending one. And it's not just somebody that's up here speaking. It's the people that make the cupcakes to go to the meetings that the board is having. Every little thing is an act of resistance. Sharing a smile with the person that serves you coffee in the morning, that helps spread love in the world. That's all we need to do. Just strengthen yourself, love yourself, and then go spread that love through the world. That is how love wins. Amen.